Hey, I'm Andy. Today I'm going to be talking about my experience with anorexia nervosa, my recovery, and how I cope with it now that I've recovered. So if you're interested, keep watching. So, where do I start? I'm going to start when I was around 11 years old. I was really having a hard time because around that age is when females start developing. And I'm pretty short. I'm 4'11". I haven't ever got any taller. I was 4'11 then. I'm still 4'11 now. And so I wasn't, it doesn't have room to like stretch out. You're more compact, if you know what I mean. So, I mean, weight shows more on a shorter person. So, it's also really hard to tell when a shorter person is losing a lot of weight. It's really hard to tell when a shorter person like me actually has an eating disorder unless you're really closely linked with like their eating habits and their exercising habits and you see they're in that mindset. But just by looking at them, it's difficult to do sometimes. In my situation, it was. So, when I was around 11, I still had the baby weight and I was developing and everything. I kind of developed before all the other kids. I was the first kid to wear a bra, all that kind of stuff. So, I got made fun of for that, and it really did take a toll on me. I even had some comments from family members, telling me like I was an hourglass or whatever. And I took it as offense. And now I'm looking back and I'm like, that's not offensive. Like, thank you, you know? But back then I took it as offense because we all wanted to be that stick thin, you know, cover model. So I wanted to be stick thin and I wasn't. So when I was 13, I don't really know how I fell into it. I have to be honest with you, I don't know. Because the thing about anorexia is when I say fell into it, I'm referring falling into the anorexia mindset. Because once you fall, it's like I don't even remember how it started. I mean, I remember some things leading up to it, like I mentioned, but I don't remember like what exactly was like triggered because there's not a decision you make. There's no choice made. There's no decisions being made. It just happens, just like any other mental illness that you can't help. You know, it just happens, and most of the time you don't know what's even happening. So that was the same with me. I mean, and I'm a kid, I'm 12, 13, and I didn't know what was happening, but I started feeling like I had the need to continue to lose weight. Once I started losing weight and I felt the feeling of how it felt to begin to lose weight and see the number drop on the scale, I believe that subconsciously it was kind of like almost like a reward process. Like once I get to that point that I want to be, then I'm gonna be okay. I'm gonna be happy with myself. But I'm not gonna be happy with myself until I'm 95 pounds or whatever the number was, because it was always going less and less and less. But it was always striving to meet that number. And once you've lost the weight, your metabolism starts kind of being affected when you're losing a lot of weight and you stop eating. So I didn't stop eating completely, but for a good like representation of what I was eating, I would eat like a bowl of lima beans a day and maybe some almonds. But that was like it. And it didn't just go from eating like normal to that. It happened over time, but later on, that's what I was doing. So obviously, your metabolism gets affected by that. So the more that you are able, and I'm not saying please do not ever consciously restrict yourself from the feeling of hunger. Because I firmly believe that that right there is a very big contributing factor to how eating disorders, specifically anorexia, starts. Because I feel like that is where it started for me. Because once you become aware that you're hungry and you feel that feeling of hunger, and I didn't realize I was doing it, but I started resisting that feeling. And, in the normal mindset, you don't think, oh, I can't resist that. Like, I mean, if I don't eat in a few days, like, you can't resist that. You're going to have to eat something. And, but the more that you restrict and the more that you get used to it and your body gets used to it and your body gets used to the feeling of ignoring hunger and almost overlooking it or shunning it, it becomes more used to it. And so your body and your metabolism, it gets used to it. It adjusts. And you don't even realize it. And that's how you get stuck, is once you start restricting and once you start avoiding hunger and just ignoring it completely, and you're able to get to that point where the hunger it's not even in your mind anymore, because it's all in your mind. That's when you start down the slippery slope. And I call it the slippery slope because once you're at that point, I mean, it's very hard to come back from that. I mean, if you can catch somebody before they get to the point where they're restricting and they're already getting that kind of instant gratification by, oh, I restricted, I avoided hunger, so now I see the scale dropping. If you can get to somebody before they get to that point, then usually you can stop it, in my opinion, because I've had that experience now as I'm older. But back then, like, I didn't have anybody stopping me. Nobody was really worried about me because an eating disorder is not really first on the mind of parents or anybody for like a 13-year-old. It's not even something people talk about. Like, it's a stigma just like any other mental illness. Like, we don't talk about anorexia every day. So, I mean, it's not recognized. So once I started restricting more, I started exercising a lot, and it got excessive to a point where it was an addiction, because seeing that number drop, whether it be restricting my food or, going to burn this many calories, it became an addiction. And again, I was not choosing to have the mindset, oh, I need to lose weight to look good. That's what people don't understand about eating anorexia, is that none of us make the choice like, oh, like, I am purposely going to starve myself and be skin and bones because I want to look, like that. Like, maybe in the back of your mind, you're like, oh, I really do want to look like that, But for me, it was never like I'm choosing to starve myself. Because you don't even know you're starving yourself. That's the difference. Is maybe you are doing it to lose weight, but you don't know what's wrong about it. You can't pinpoint and put your finger on, oh, there's something wrong about this. Oh, it's not okay to starve myself. That's the difference, is you don't think there's anything wrong with starving yourself. So then it becomes a lifestyle, and it becomes that mindset, that anorexic mindset, that it's very hard to get out of, and it's a slippery slope. Because once you start falling, you fall in deeper. And it keeps going, and it's very hard to get back up. Very, very hard. So I fell very hard, wasn't really aware of how bad my addiction had become. It is an addiction. I'm going to refer to it as an addiction because it is an addiction. I didn't realize how bad it had become. I didn't know I was doing something wrong. I had no idea that what I was doing was wrong. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was getting in shape. I thought I was, eating good, like all these things. I thought it was positive. Never any negativity came into my mind. So, eventually my mom, like, took me to the doctor, and one doctor mentioned when I got to, like, 95 pounds, she was like, hey, Andy, like, I noticed that you've lost some weight, like, because before I was 115, for reference. So I was 115 and I had gone down to 95. So, I mean, that's a good amount of weight. And she had noticed it. And she was like, hey, Andy, I noticed you're losing some weight. And she tried to ask me some questions about, like, what I was doing. And I just avoided. I was like, there's nothing wrong. I'm just in shape and I love exercising. I made it, and I didn't think that it was wrong. So I thought she was crazy. I thought why are you telling me that it's bad that I'm losing weight? You were the doctor telling me that my BMI was borderline overweight a couple months ago. So look, isn't this great? But what I didn't realize was how rapidly I was losing weight, and the unhealthy way I was losing it was what the problem was. And she recognized that. She mentioned to my mom that, like, it may be something to be concerned about. And I convinced my mom that the doctor was nuts and that there's nothing wrong with me and that I'm doing the right thing for myself. So my mom took me to a different doctor a little while later, because I had continued to lose weight. At this point, I believe when I went to the second doctor, I was 80 pounds. Because I know when I got admitted to the hospital, I was 79 pounds. So I believe I went to this doctor because I went to the primary care doctor. He saw me. He didn't really bring up any concerns. But then later that night, he called my mom on her personal phone and was like, "You need to take your daughter to the emergency room in downtown Dallas right now and have her admitted to the inpatient psychiatric unit for children." And my mom was like, "What?" And he was like, "I believe she has anorexia." After thinking about it, after um, going home and thinking about it, I believe she has anorexia, and I believe that it's getting dangerous to a point where it could affect her heart and the strength of her heart being able to pump blood. So my mom and my dad did what he said. They forcefully put me into the car, had to literally physically force me into the car. I was so upset. And they gave me a thing of almonds, and they're like, "Andy, eat these." I felt so bad because I'm thinking back, they're just frantically trying to do whatever they could because they had no idea, and they weren't expected to even know what the heck was going on. So, they're like frantically like, "Andy, eat something, eat some almonds, or you're gonna die on the way to the hospital." And I'm like, "I'll eat one." And and then as we're driving, because we live more near Fort Worth, so it was kind of a drive to Dallas. My parents are speeding, and we're going to Dallas, and I'm getting more scared because now we're in downtown Dallas, and I'm like, "Oh God, they're serious. They're serious about this." And I told my mom, and I was like, "I will eat a skinny cow ice cream cone if you do not take me to the hospital." Like that was like some major accomplishment because a diet ice cream cone was going to do so much for me. But they put me into the emergency room, and pretty immediately they took my blood because I'm not really sure the science of it, but they can check for certain stuff as far as like malnutrition in your blood and like the refeeding syndrome, which I'll talk about more later. But they took my blood and everything, and they were like, "Yeah, she needs to get admitted to the children's inpatient unit," but it was it was said to be one of the best units for eating disorders in the United States at the time. So my parents were like, "Yes." So after being in the emergency room, they admitted me the next day. So I started my stint there, and I saw a therapist, did every type of therapy that you could ever imagine, but most of it was focused on refeeding. So, refeeding is basically when someone's body is in starvation mode, your body is trying to hang on to every last thing possible. Um, and so, something that's not safe to do is to quickly refeed somebody after their body's been in starvation mode because it can, I'm not sure exactly what it is, but it can send like a shock to the system and actually do more harm. And so, they had to be really careful with that to refeed me, but they checked my blood like twice a day to make sure that I wasn't suffering from that refeeding syndrome. But they started actually threatening me. They were like, "You know what?" Because I refused to eat. When I went in there, I was like, "No, I'm not eating this." My first night there, they put a whole full fried catfish dinner in front of me, and they're like, "Andy, eat that." And I'm like, "I just came from eating like 3 lima beans a day, and you want me to eat a whole fried catfish dinner," which I love now, okay. But I was like, "No, I'm not doing that." And it got to a point where I think it was 3 days in that I hadn't eaten anything. I had just drank their stupid supplement that they had given me, the like boost or whatever. But they needed me to eat food. So they threatened me with a feeding tube. They were like, "You know what? If you don't start eating, we're giving you the tube today." And I was like, "God, I'm not getting that tube," because I had seen another girl there with the tube. And I was sitting next to her one day in group therapy, and she took it out of her nose and just ripped that thing out from the bottom of her stomach. And ever since that moment, I was like, I am not getting a tube. So I started eating. But I will mention that they did have me on the cardiac floor for a little while, maybe just like a day, because they needed to check my heart to make sure it hadn't been that affected. So they took me down a cardiac floor. They gave me an echo, which is basically like a sonogram for your heart. Instead of like for pregnant women, it's like a sonogram. You can see what's inside and all that. But for this, it was echo cardiogram, I guess that's what you call it, and they put it over my chest to see, like, was my heart strong, was it pumping blood, everything like that. And thankfully it was. They told me that it was working fine, so I wouldn't have to be transferred to the cardiac floor. Now, I will say that as far as long-term effects that my anorexia caused, it did stop my growth. I never grew past the height I'm at, and I did have a doctor tell me that it was because of the starvation during that really critical time for growth and development. And then another long-term effect would definitely be my immune system. I get sick very easily. Like, it's to a point where I have to take vitamin C every day. I've been doing that for years because otherwise I would be sick like twice a month consistently. And I did have a doctor mention that it could be due to my weakened immune system, which I believe has gotten better. But for a long time, it was even weaker because I was so like frail and didn't have anything to contribute as far as like fighting viruses or bacteria because my body was shutting down. So um, basically, they put me through every type of therapy: animal therapy, art therapy, music therapy, everything. I spent a lot of time drawing in that unit. I knitted necklaces, things like that. I got to know some of the other patients too. Some of them were in there for eating disorders, some of them were in there for things like self harm and suicide attempts and things like that. So I got to learn a lot. Um, and I was in there for a total of 2 months, and it was really an interesting experience. I mean, being an inpatient there and um, seeing how they treat eating disorder patients was what blew my mind the most, because they're, I mean, and rightfully so, they were mostly focused on just getting you to gain that weight. And of course, like, that's the whole point, because we want you to be healthy. I get that. But they weren't really focused on, like, why did she even get anorexia in the first place? Like, what's behind this? Because it's, in my opinion, it's uncommon for anorexia or an eating disorder to just pop up without something um, coming before it. Like, there's usually a root cause, like whether it be depression, self-esteem issues, or in my case, a borderline personality disorder, which had formed from experiences in my childhood. So I mean, they didn't really get too much into that. Yeah, they had therapy and everything, but the therapy was more focused on getting your mind off of having to eat 6 times a day and gaining weight. It was more distraction therapy than anything. It didn't really get down and deep into really what I ended up needing later on. So I was in the unit for 2 months as an inpatient, and I never really did the outpatient treatment because it didn't really work for me. It wasn't the same. So I never really just went to the hospital once a day and then went home. I never really did that. I was an inpatient, and then after I was an inpatient, I went home. I had gained 12 pounds in that unit. So over 2 months, I gained 12 pounds. So I ended up coming out of there at 92 pounds. And that was seen as healthy enough to go home. So obviously they were encouraging me to gain more weight, which again, like I'm 4'11", so if you had looked at me even when I was 80 pounds, 79 pounds, which I think was my lowest, you wouldn't have thought, oh, she has anorexia just by looking at me. I don't think you would have, because I didn't look like a skeleton. Like I said, I'm shorter, so it's more compact. If I was taller, you would definitely be able to tell. But I think that kind of caused some of the delay in diagnosing me. But so anyways, they tried to get me to continue to gain weight after I had gone home, but the whole outpatient thing wasn't really working that well, especially since I was going into junior high. And what really sucked is, like, I had to go eat lunch, and I still had my snack routine. So I had breakfast, snack, lunch, snack, dinner, snack. And I had to go make sure I did each of those. And the nurse at the school had to document it because it was a medical illness. So what was really embarrassing and hard was trying to gain weight, because I was so embarrassed and ashamed that I had to go eat lunch and every snack in the nurse's office. Because, I mean, nobody really understood. I mean, you don't talk about anorexia, and I was brand new to public school too, which was like a whole lot at once after being in that unit. But I didn't really gain that much weight over the next few years. I kind of just stayed where I was when I left the unit. I never relapsed. I never got back to where I was before I got in the unit, which I was really lucky because a lot of people I knew in that unit, a lot of the fellow patients had relapsed many times, male or female. It didn't matter the age. Like they had relapsed many times. I knew a girl that was in that unit for 2 years, so my case was very mild compared to theirs. And I feel so lucky that I never relapsed to that degree. I did end up relapsing in a different way where I actually formed bulimia, where I was throwing up, binging, and purging. And that didn't last very long. It only lasted for maybe like 6 months, which I guess is kind of a long time. But I kind of just got over it myself. I don't know really what happened. It just kind of stopped. But I would say my recovery process is really different. Like, I wouldn't say that it's typical because I really wasn't going to therapy that often, because my parents were like, we don't think that therapy worked for you, which obviously I disagree with. I think I should have continued in therapy after going through what I did, but you know. So, my recovery process, I would say that I really started to recover, I would say around age 16 or 17, which is really soon for someone with an eating disorder that was diagnosed in 2013, because anorexia can be a lifelong thing. I mean, it can be something that lasts your whole life, and never leaves you. And thankfully for me, it hasn't been that. So, when I was 16 or 17, I met a guy and I started dating him. He was the first guy I ever dated, and he was my best friend also. We were really close, and he knew everything about what I had been through as far as like my mental illness issues and the eating disorder, and he had been so supportive because we kind of had that bond because he had had some issues with depression and trauma. So we bonded over that, and he really changed my point of view on everything. But I think more than anything, and this is not typical of, I don't know if it's typical of eating disorder recovery, but for me, what really changed it was experiencing intimacy for the first time. As crazy as it sounds, when I first started having sex and I had that physical intimacy for the first time, it's like something changed in me. It was like, wow, someone actually loves my body for what it is. And he loved it when I even gained some weight. And I was like, oh, wow. I think it just changed my mindset a lot. Like, I think being naked in front of somebody and being that vulnerable, because that is absolute, complete vulnerability with somebody. And I think that people with eating disorders and mental illness are most scared of vulnerability. I think that forcing me to be vulnerable really is what drove my recovery. So as crazy as it sounds, I will stand by the fact that sex helped me recover from an eating disorder. Vulnerability, because they're one and the same. They really are. So after that, I mean, I started gaining weight and no problem. I mean, when I was with my ex, like I ate whatever I wanted. He introduced me to all these foods that I hadn't had in who knows how long. And now I'm 23, so it's been 10 years officially. And now I go McDonald's, get myself a hamburger, French fries, and I don't feel bad about it. Like, it's crazy to me because 10 years ago I was sitting at the kitchen table with my dad, and he put a bag of goldfish in front of me, and he was like, "Eat it. You're not leaving this table until you eat this handful of goldfish." So he just took a handful out of the bag, put it on the table, and he's like, "Andy, you're not leaving this table. You're not going to bed until you eat this handful." He was at his wit's end. He didn't know what to do because I wouldn't eat a thing. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't eat the goldfish. And now 10 years later, I eat whatever I want. My favorite food is chicken wings, which God forbid I ate anything fried or anything like that 10 years ago, or even a couple years ago. I feel like I've recovered so much in the past few years because I kind of have the attitude where, like, okay, like, I don't really care that much. I'm not going to make all this effort to, mess myself up and get back into that unhealthy mindset where you fall down that slippery slope just to look a certain way, because God, look what it can do to you. So yeah, I mean, now I eat chicken wings no problem. It's my favorite, and it's the past. And I can't say that I won't ever relapse, because once you're there, I mean, you're always at risk of going back. But I think that I was really lucky in being able to not relapse this long. So hopefully you just keep going. But I just wanted to share my story. And if you have experienced an eating disorder or any mental illness, and you want to talk about it and you feel comfortable talking about it, please comment. Please comment, do something, because I think sharing it and ending the stigma is the best thing that we can do as people. Um, and I want to hear more. I want to hear other stories and what you've been through, as far as like if you do have an experience with an eating disorder, because I feel like people who have gone through it really understand. So, yeah, leave a comment. Thank you so much for watching.